both Aimee and Ernest are incredibly talented tech support professionals, sound techs for Zoom meetings, and just overall amazing people. I've had the pleasure to work with them, under them, and with their support many, many times. And these guys, they know what the hell they're doing. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Ernest and Aimee, who will present together the first and the second sessions of today. This one is in English, the role of the interpreting technician on Zoom. Guys, take it away.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and good morning and good afternoon. I don't know that we have anybody that would qualify for a good evening here. My name is Ernest Niño-Murcia, and I'm joined by my colleague, Aimee Benavides. Together, we are 66.6% of TEA Language Solutions. And Daniel just gave the description of our that project in the bio. So let's start by going back. Aimee, do you remember the very first time we tried Zoom simultaneous interpretation?
I remember a lot of awkward moments. I don't know that I remember the exact first time, but yeah,
I remember it vaguely. So what the picture you're seeing here is a subsequent session. The very first time that we got on, I remember it was a Saturday afternoon, and I had some notion that Zoom now had this feature. And so I had you and Tamber and a few other colleagues on, and it was truly the blind leading the blind. None of us knew how to launch it, how to operate it, putting people in channels, listening, how any of the architecture of it worked. And so together, the genesis of TEA Language Solutions was the three of us sort of groping around in the dark, trying to figure out what this tool was and what we could do with it. And so from that came demo sessions with colleagues to teach them and give them an opportunity. As we started to figure it out through trial and error, we were able to share it with colleagues, and that grew into giving webinars, and then that grew into starting to use it with our own clients. And so this was one of the very first depositions that I was able to do, and this was taken with permission and shared with permission. This was one of the very first depositions that I did using simultaneous interpretation, and it worked because I was in the attorney's office. The client was in the attorney's office. And so any troubleshooting, worst case, I could just run down the hall, click a button on the computer, make sure they're in the right channel, make sure the attorney is doing what he needs to. And so it was an easy sort of troubleshoot. Aimee, do you remember when you started rolling this out and using it with your clients?
I want to say it was probably in April or June. Because I had clients who just couldn't travel anymore, and all of their work was international travel. So we started doing webinars pretty soon after we figured this out.
And it was a steep learning curve because everybody was figuring it out, and we just happened to know a little bit more about it. But this was truly, people say that they learn at the school of hard knocks. This was truly our education, because through this trial and error, we learned a lot of the common issues and started to think through solutions and how to avoid them. And so fast forward about 2 years, we started getting hired by event organizers, online event organizers, to come on and be their tech support for interpretation. And then that grew into even expanding beyond strictly spoken language interpretation to where we were doing live captioning and signed interpretation and sort of virtual event production. You can see this is a particularly big event in terms of its scale. And then now the interesting new frontier, and something that Aimee is really at the forefront of, are hybrid meetings. And so taking a scenario like this, where the speaker is in the room, the listeners are in the room, but you might have interpreters connecting from across the country, across the world, and being able to get that audio in and out of that room clearly, that's the next challenge. And it's a really interesting mixture of conventional audio tech skills in terms of mics and cables and making it work in an analog world, but then also fusing that with Zoom and using the platform. And so that's where in these situations, we work with on-site technicians and basically tell them, give us a good audio feed into Zoom and we'll take care of the interpretation part of it. And so there's a lot of collaboration. Aimee, what's your number one key to success for a good hybrid event while we're talking about this?
I would say definitely planning ahead and getting logistics information. If the facility doesn't have good internet, you're going to have a hard time making hybrid work. So
Yes.
you need a lot of information about the site before you can even propose hybrid.
Absolutely. And I think for me, the biggest thing that will cause the meeting to rise or fall is going to be the quality of the audio coming into Zoom, because we complain about bad audio, somebody who doesn't have a mic. Imagine trying to take audio from this room if the audio is coming from a laptop that's positioned in the middle of the room with no mic, with no audio feed into it. It's a nightmare. And where you have good hybrid, you see the possibilities that really exist with this and how it could really be a game changer for both organizers and interpreters who will no longer have to fly across the country potentially. But it's not necessarily easier or cheaper than conventional solutions. You just kind of are choosing where you allocate your resources. So this is me in simpler times, the before times, as Daniel said. And so for those of you who are familiar with working in a physical booth, you see the console, the booth, and the analogy to online technician work is, you don't walk into the meeting room and find the console still boxed up and find the booth disassembled. You walk into an assembled, put together booth and everything has been tested and there's somebody there on hand to listen and to troubleshoot. And so the goal in being a technician on Zoom is to do something similar, but in a virtual space. And so if we were to craft, for example, a job posting, right, outlining the job description, these are the core elements. You want to make sure that you are on the meeting to get everybody in. Interpreters have their links, get them through the waiting room. If anybody has an issue, loses the link, is having issues accessing the meeting, you're there to support that. You want to be there for sound check. So make sure that both the speakers and the interpreters sound good, get assigned correctly in the channel that they're supposed to be, all of that. And one of the scenarios that's come up some, and it's kind of a very bittersweet situation because, Aimee, do you know when we see speakers and they have them, you can see that they have a headset on, but the sound is really echoey and bad, right? So you see a nice boom mic, but the audio sounds like this. What do we call that?
Decorative.
Yes, that's what we call a decorative microphone. And so it looks really nice, but it's not actually working because the audio, the person's output is not actually coming through that microphone. And so in most cases that has an easy fix, and that's a really easy way to very quickly add value to a meeting. If you see the audio just improved 100%, the quality of the audio from this person because of a quick fix and being able to catch it and knowing how to fix it. Another way that we do is monitoring and troubleshooting interpretation. So listening to the channels constantly and then stepping in if there's any issue. And I've included this picture because this was very early on. One of the first jobs we did, I got a panicked message from an interpreter saying, help, I'm getting these notifications because I want to take a step back. They were all given co-host privileges so that they would be able to unmute themselves if there were a security situation and the host muted everybody. But as a result, they were getting all the waiting room notifications and they would be getting those on top of their dashboard for interpreting, for changing their channels. And so they wrote me in a panic saying, help, I'm continuing to get these pop-ups. It's blocking my channels. I can't switch channels. And so knowing the platform and being able to tell them, click on the participant button. If that opens it up in the margin so that you have an actual participant list, you'll stop getting the pop-ups and boom, instantly the clouds part and the problem is solved. Another issue or another prong of what we try to do is being the communication hub between hosts and interpreters. And so being the point of contact, any interpreter problem flows through us. and either we resolve it or we notify the host. And so that takes weight off of both the hosts and the interpreters. And planning, coordinating with the client. But when we were more of a mercenary role, when we were coming in to an existing planned meeting and we were just coming in for the very clearly prescribed purpose of providing interpreter support, the planning was limited. It might be an email and we were talking about logistics. How are we getting the interpreters the links? How are we doing the sort of initial housekeeping portion of the program? But it wasn't much beyond that. And so the planning, again, was very clearly circumscribed. But that changed over time. And so the first era of TEA language solutions was what we call the duct tape era of Zoom. And I don't know if you remember this, but this was all that we had as far as an interpreting dashboard. And if you wanted to listen to your partner, if you wanted to take relay, you were going about it through what we refer to colloquially in the US as a duct tape solution. And so an improvised, haphazard, juggle two devices, pop in an earbud sort of solution. And it certainly made meetings interesting, but it also made it very hard for interpreters. And so this was the initial learning curve that we were trying to guide both hosts and interpreters through in terms of training interpreters, helping them get set up, helping them sound check their two devices, and then monitoring that everything went okay during a meeting. Now, that changed. There were three things that changed and brought us into the new era of our work as technicians. Number one, Zoom got better. And so what you're looking at is the relay functionality that rolled out, I believe, early last year. And so gone were the days of having two devices and having to connect a second device to take relay, at least for relay. I just want to say as an aside, I still don't think that it's appropriate for interpreters to use the relay function to listen to their partner. But that's an aside. Another change, for example, was the advent of custom languages. And so before we were having to do, again, duct tape. If we had Vietnamese, we would have to say, for Vietnamese, listen in the Portuguese channel or something. The interpreters would have to squat in another channel because there were only these 8 options available. But now you can see the wide array of options available. And the other thing that came about was just as over time, interpreters got more practice and got better. And so we were doing much less interpreter training and much less interpreter triage during meetings. And that was wonderful and allowed us more bandwidth to work more closely with clients. And the other thing that changed was we were coming in much less of a mercenary capacity and working directly with our own clients. So we were able to get involved at a deeper level in the planning process and earlier on. And so that's where the line blurs between technician and consultant. And that's what we've been working with really the last couple of years. And I wanted to talk about, in that process of being a technician consultant, what are the big issues that we're trying to preempt, that we're trying to address? And so for anybody who has been online in the last 3 years working, you know the number one issue is audio quality. I had to actually Google this. What you were seeing here is called an ear trumpet. I Googled ear funnel, but this is what came up, ear trumpet, which is before hearing aids. It's supposed to help you hear better, which we often need when sound is subpar. And so we know that interpreters need good audio, but the way that we've gone about it is trying to put it in terms of a win-win and putting it in terms of the client's interests. And so explaining why it suits their purposes to have clear audio in the meeting, not only because it will allow for better interpretation, because it's a better experience for their monolingual listeners. And so something, you can talk about it all you want, but I really like to show it, to really demonstrate it. And so what I do, if I can get in a planning meeting with the client, is I say, listen to how I sound, and then listen to the difference. listen to how I am bouncing, echoing, and I'm very blessed in this regard that I have a really bad mic on my webcam. And so the difference is stark. And that allows people to actually see and experience and start to think about how that can make their meeting better. And so, Aimee, you had an example recently that I thought was really good of how you can get what the interpreters want, but put it in terms of the client's interests. Can you share that?
Yeah. There's an organization that deals with a lot of disability issues and things like that. And, whenever we look at what does the interpreter need and we try to frame it in what does the client want. So, for example, in terms of audio, we tell them we're going to be on Zoom. We want to get this as close to broadcast quality as we can. Makes them think about TV and radio and wanting to look and sound good. So we definitely speak to what would maybe be of interest to them. So in this case, it was an on-site event, and we were going to be interpreting on-site, but they didn't have a booth. We didn't have an audio feed. And I thought to myself, how do we convince them that we need to have access to a soundboard to get an audio feed? Well, if we connect it to a transmitter, that means we can use receivers. That also means the audience can use receivers. And what is that called when the audience has a receiver to be able to hear the speakers better? That's an assistive listening device. And that's considered like an ADA sort of accommodation. And
That's
so a disabilities organization, that speaks to their soul of accommodating people who have, limited hearing issues.
Yes, that's a perfect synergy. And when we say ADA, we mean Americans with Disabilities Act, which is a law that governs accommodations for disabled people in different spheres of life here in the U.S. And so that's an excellent example of how you can create a win-win. And what comes out of these conversations that I have with my clients about audio is, at a very, very minimum, ask the speakers to use a wired USB microphone. And no, we don't care if it's a table mic or a headset. If the budget is there and the will and the time is there for the logistics, actually send them microphones. And we have a particular model of microphone that we love and that we have sent to many of our clients. And so having the audio in place, you are set up for success. At a lot of other things can still go wrong, but you at least have that taken care of. And so the second issue that we've encountered is you've got to, once you have a good feed going to the interpreters, coming from the interpreters, you've got to get people in their channels to be able to hear them, because it doesn't do you any good to have a meeting with interpreters going and nobody able to listen to them. Part of this is giving good guidance on what devices are compatible with Zoom interpretation. So letting the client know, hey, don't offer a dial-in number because you can't, except through magic, through a technique that Aimee created, access interpretation through a conventional phone connection to a Zoom meeting, nor can you access it through, actually you can now. No, you can't. Well, there's a workaround. Chromebooks are problematic for interpretation. Sorry, I don't want to go off on a tangent. But the number one mistake that I notice, or the area of improvement that I notice in terms of the guidance hosts give their listeners on accessing interpretation, is that they are way too centered on the computer desktop client interface. So they just in passing say, look for the interpretation button, look for the globe. And that's perfect if somebody is on a desktop or a laptop. But many of your listeners may be on mobile devices, and that is a more involved, more complicated process. And so we try to really focus with our clients on giving broad-based guidance that will help people get into a channel regardless of what device they are using. Because like I said, the process for connecting on a mobile device is completely different. And I want to point out something else here too, is that you will notice that in this guidance, the mute original audio function is crossed out. This is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. And that is that mute original audio is not a harmless stylistic choice. It has big implications on how the audio works in the meeting and can have unintended consequences in terms of whether people can hear speakers in their own language. And so we are coming up on time. I'm going to get through a little bit of the next portion and then we'll take questions. So what this comes down to, big picture in terms of our planning with clients, can be broken down into these two circles. What we do that is serving language access, and what we do that is what we call production, helping the event overall, and things that could be done in an event where no interpreters were used. And so you see how the kind of evolution has come about away to some extent from strictly interpretation. So for example, we want to talk to clients about enabling interpretation so that they're able to have it if they need to set that up in their account. How to manage a waiting room and security, because that's something that potentially affects interpreters. That's here in the intersection. Hosting, if they don't have an account or want us to host, that's something that we could do. The use of custom languages we talked about. If they want to have a language that's not one of the defaults, they would go in and create it, which you can now do, which is wonderful. Breakout rooms is a big topic because there's no simultaneous enabled in breakout rooms. And so if a client wants to do breakout rooms, they have to somehow either have them be monolingual, have consecutive interpretation, keep non-English speaking, or keep whoever needs interpretation, keep them in the main room and have that be sort of their breakout room. That's the sort of guidance that we try to give to meet the client's needs within the bounds of what Zoom can offer. Audiovisual support. So again, away from interpretation, this would be playing videos, spotlighting speakers, depending on what needs to happen. And the very last thing that I will do so that we don't go over on time is share the last point of intersection, which is, and this is just a really neat feature that I wanted to share, which is that you can actually share multiple PowerPoints at the same time and have people pick which PowerPoint they are seeing the way that they pick their audio channels. And so I can't really go into enormous detail about this due to time constraints, but if this is of interest to you, be in touch and we would be happy to walk through how this happens. So like I said, you can have an English PowerPoint and the Portuguese PowerPoint playing at the same time, and viewers, just like they pick their audio channel, would be able to pick which PowerPoint they are seeing or which, whatever, any sort of screen share. Multiple screen shares can happen that people choose from. And so there is more. And so it's good to leave them wanting more. Hopefully this has piqued your curiosity, and we would be happy to continue talking about the evolving role of Zoom technicians, but due to time, and because I really do want to get to questions, we will leave it there. I will skip forward actually to our contact information, and then you will have ways to keep in touch. That's our website. We have a blog where we outline some of the geekier things that we like to discuss. There's our email to be in touch, and we have a YouTube with some videos demonstrating some of these, and hopefully with additional content in the future. And so thank you all very much. We will now gladly take questions, and I will shut down the screen share.